Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers in Winnipeg. Tonight, we're broadcasting from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. This is McNally Robinson's final event for 2020, and I cannot think of a better way to go out than by celebrating this latest incredible installment of Cooleyana, the Muse Sings, which is the latest collection from Dennis Cooley, published by the good folks at Bay Press. We have an incredible evening ahead of you with a number of very special guests who will be joining us to read some works. Over the course of the evening, there will be an opportunity, as time permits at the end, to interrogate Dennis, which can also include some of your questions. So over the course of the evening, as questions occur to you, please do feel free to write them into the Q&A box, which you'll find just at the bottom of your Zoom screen. That'll ensure that your host for the evening, a certain Mr. Neil Besner, will be able to locate them properly when it comes time to put those questions to Dennis. But before we get underway, I'd just like to mention that we do have somebody here to speak to the book itself, a little bit about the publication as well. So I'd like you all to join me in virtually welcoming Matt Jodrey, who is the publisher at Bay Press. Matt?
Thanks very much, John. It's a pleasure to be here. And while I can't see all of the participants out there, thanks for joining us as well tonight for a very special book. Here's what I know about Dennis Cooley. Dennis Cooley is a very gifted magician, specifically a master of sleight of hand. Magic is, of course, not real. It is merely misdirection. The audience is captivated by a prestige of showmanship, while the magician palms something off at the fringe of frame. With Dennis, there is no palming, no misdirection, only magic. Genuine magic. Maybe he has been endowed with special powers. Maybe he has tapped into something the rest of us are unaware exists. Maybe it's just Dennis. I honestly don't know. What I can tell you is that Dennis has cast his spell on me as he has so many others out there. A magician of the first order, of the highest order. That said, I've heard from somewhat dubious sources that he's a pretty decent poet too. And it's been my pleasure to be able to produce this book with Dennis, with Barb, with Matt Stevens, with Corey J. Elston, and so many others that have had a hand in making this happen. It is a beautiful book, but its beauty is empowered by the words that Dennis puts on the page. And it's been my great pleasure to just be a part of it. Honestly, it's been so great. So with that, I'm gonna hand it back to John Taves, and I thank you all for coming here tonight.
Thank you so much, Matt. We're now getting into the evening itself. So we have a very special guest here to host tonight. Neil Besner taught Canadian literature for 30 years at the University of Winnipeg. From its founding in 2004 until this year, he edited the Laurier Poetry Series, LPS, with Wilfrid Laurier University Press, which is currently at 30 volumes, including one on Dennis Cooley, coincidentally selected with an introduction by another one of our special guests this evening, Nicole Markotić. Each volume in the Wilfrid Laurier University Press series selects work from an individual Canadian poet. And this one, as you can imagine, reflects just even more of the genius inherent to a certain Dennis Cooley's work. But here to host the evening, please join me in welcoming Neil Besner. Who will dramatically emerge from the digital fog. There we are.
Good evening, everybody. John, thanks very much. Dennis, I can't see you now, and that's good that I can't see Dennis for the moment. I just want to say a word about this book, the physical book, for a second, and then I want to say a couple of words about Dennis. Then I'm going to have a brief conversation with him about the Muse, the subject of this book, and then we're going to hear some of the poems read. But just a word about the book. I've seen if not all, most of Dennis's books. I've been to many of Dennis's launches, and I have to tell you, Matt and At Bay Press, this is the most beautiful book physically that I have seen of Dennis's. It's absolutely lovely. If anybody has not seen the book, you should buy it, but whether you buy it or not, have a look. It is beautifully produced. It's a hardback edition. You can hold it in your hand. I've been living with it for the last couple of months. Dennis handed over a copy to me over breakfast one day in St. Boniface, and I just want to say this is a beautifully produced book. I've known Dennis for way too long, and I've admired his poetry for a long, long time. We've talked about his poetry for a long time, and I want to just say that this book is about the Muse, obviously. The Muse Sings is the title. And what I would say is that Dennis's books have all, in one way or another, invoked the Muse. It's just that this book takes as its principal theme the Muse, and it's divided into several sections, each of which addresses the Muse or lets the Muse sing or talk or be silent from a different perspective. And so I'd like to just have a little short conversation with Dennis. He's very shy. Dennis is very shy. He won't say very much, but you know, let's just see if he has something to say about the Muse. Dennis, it seems to me that this particular book has a lot to say about who a Muse might be on the prairies, when a Muse is silent, when a Muse is female, when a Muse is male, when a Muse is erotic. This is, I think, the most erotic book that you've written. I don't know why, but I think it is. Dennis, just tell us a little bit about why write a book called The Muse Sings. What brought you to this as the subject of this book? Because I love it. But talk to us, Dennis.
Thanks. Well, part of it was an accident, and it involves Matt Joudry, and it involves Kieran Clavelle, who's going to show up in a few minutes, because one day Kieran Clavelle said to me, "I've been working with this man, Matt Joudry, at Bay Press, and you know, I think he might be interested. You give him a try, go have a talk with him." So I did, sat down. Matt said, "Have you got a book?" And I said, "I think I got something that I can maybe turn into a book." And he said, "Well, let's see something." So away I went and constructed this book. So I had a lot of material that I could draw on, but I then built a book around this theme, which is kind of dangerous in some ways these days, I think, to do this sort of thing, probably foolish. But I mean, I believe in writing as a craft, that it's something you work hard at, you learn, you practice, you emulate models, you do research, you revise, you edit, that it's enormous amount of professional and dedicated work. And I believe that's to be true, that if you don't do that, you're not going to do the kind of writing you ought to be doing. At the same time, part of me believes that inspiration, in fact, is crucial, not just helpful, but crucial to writing, something that excites you and maybe carries you through with some kind of impetus, some kind of excitement, something that's maybe almost irrational. And how do you explain the sense that you've been kind of visited, maybe caught up, and maybe even taken over a bit by? That's a very long and old notion. And it's something that I think holds, it does hold for me much of the time anyway. So the source of writing, what impels you, what gets you going, I think is often inspiration of some kind or another. And the best or most traditional name we have for that is the Muse. So I love that. And I think you're right. I constantly writing out of a sense of muse. Here it becomes an overt kind of project, a challenge in some ways. How can you write about the Muse? And how can you do it that's not simply a rewriting or a bald rewriting what everyone else has done? I mean, up until now, the Muse in a fairly conventional poem, I think, would be a female who's fairly distant, a male poet Didn't have to be that way. It often was. And the inspiration is carried in the absence of the muse, often in the lament. So I work at this, take variations on this. My poet is often bitching and whining and wheedling and complaining and filled with indignation. And the muses have their own kinds of petulances and grievances. So I tend to write out that kind of dialogue in here. And I wrote it largely out of a sense of play and comedy.
So Dennis, thank you. Anybody who's read your poetry for 35 years, and many of us have 35, 45, 55 years, because you're old, Dennis. We're all getting a little bit old. Listen, I think you always do this, except that now you've made it the subject of this particular book. You say you had an interview with Ariel Gordon just a little time ago, and you said in it that you were trying to please, to delight. I'm quoting you. You're trying to please, to delight. I'm trying to see what I might make of the muse as a literary trope. More generally, I want to see where writing has taken us and where it might go. I'll tell you where my question is taking us. You said just now that you thought that the muse was a traditional trope that poets of old, usually male, lamented and invoked and so on and so forth. But what I see in this book is that you are trying to figure out where the muse is now, where the muse is on the prairie, where the muse is in the digital age, where the muse is in printers, where the muse is in script. Yeah. Could you just talk about that for a second?
Well, I think you said that very, very well, yes. One of our special guests in a few minutes is going to be reading a poem, I hope, that deals with the printer. But yes, what might be the source for excitement being taken and brought into action? I picked up all sorts of things, including some of the most mundane things. I mean, who would think that a printer might be in any way a muse? And perhaps it isn't. But in the poem, I'm trying to make it a muse. But yes, I try to find variations on this. There are various forms. One is an interrogation. There's a ridiculous letter. The poet writes pleadingly to the muse, the absent muse, and goes through a ridiculously long set of addresses as he tries out how he might approach and win over the skills of the muse. So yes, there are many versions of the muse. It's part of the fun for me. I'd say what can be done.
Exactly. So Dennis, this conversation feels to me like it could go on for a very long time, and I don't want to do that because we've got you reading a number of your poems. I really would love people to hear these poems. And then, so Dennis, I'm going to ask you to introduce the first reader, and let's just get into the readings themselves, and we can come back to this conversation a little bit later. Over to you.
Good, thank you. And thank you back to Matt, by the way, in the introduction. That was very, very good of you, and working with you has been very, very special. So now, Karen Clavelle is going to read a poem from the collection. And she was, as I said a moment ago, it was she who introduced me to Matt and to At Bay Press. And she was, I think, after Barb Schott, who was the editor, probably the first to read the entire manuscript. So she's been through it with a minute care. She's been wrestling with what she might choose here, and she and I finally came up to, we agreed on one item that she's going to read. But I just want to say, by way of introduction, that she's been very active on many fronts, as have all of our guests, phenomenal people, writers and readers and editors and teachers. She has recently published a couple of big books, one of which is another book from Matt Juji's At Bay Press, a collection of material on the Mother Goose folks. So I'm going to get Karen keyed up here to read a poem. This one is called Her Greatest Disappointment. Are you there, Karen?
I'm working on it. Yes, just a minute.
Here she comes. There's a voice.
Yep. There we are.
Okay, you're on. Thanks, Karen.
Okay, thank you. I am so pleased to be part of this event tonight. Just thank you to everybody involved, and especially Dennis for the chance to read her greatest disappointment. She's seen a lot of sighing, a lot of hand holding and moaning, and she is sick and tired of it. Let the poet get himself another muse if he can. She very much doubts. She has passed him vowels that are soft and warm in the poem, consonants that rattle like walnuts inside his skull. What is in it for her? What was the word coming to? Without pause or forethought, she had answered his sad-eyed plea, just a few words for him. She no longer was going to bring secret and shining songs, torn from the thickest chambers of her fibrillating heart. He would only stuff his pockets, carry them off every morning, claiming they were his, and dump them onto the table, where he would move the pieces as if in Scrabble, rearranging, or uncertain hand trying to retrieve the brightness in them.
Great, thank you.
That was lovely, Karen. Thanks so much. Dennis, could you talk for 1 second, not too much more, but just very quickly about words and sounds in this poem, or anything else that you want to say, or anybody else. But it's a wonderful poem to start off with, I thought. What do you think, Dennis?
Well, part of the appeal for me, the pleasure in writing that poem is the kind of oral complaint and the kind of reversal of the complaint. I mean, who's getting jerked around here? So I like that voice of offense that involves often a kind of repetition of sound, of phrase, kind of grammatical structure.
I heard Karen riffing off of that. I thought that she read it very well. The oral quality springs off the page when you hear it read aloud, which is often the hallmark of a Cooley poem, by the way. Does anybody else have anything to say about this? We have Cooley coming up. Dennis, I'm going to introduce you every time you go to read a poem. I'm going to introduce you. So, but does anybody else want to say anything about that poem before we move ahead? The poem that Karen just read? Or do you want to hear Dennis?
I would have something to say about it. That's okay.
Yeah.
I would say that this muse that he's been talking about, that you've been talking about, she's feisty and cheeky and demanding and challenging and boisterous, and she interrogates and puts pressure on, and she taunts and she grandstands and cajoles and whines and teases, and the list just goes on. It's just such a wonderful construct. In short, she sings. This is her singing, and she sings in the way a diva sings as an operatic star. That's our muse.
Yes.
I like that. This is her poem. She got not only got grievances, but she can do a little bit of this herself.
That's right. Dennis, would you like to read He Almost Escapes? Do you want to do that?
Yeah, I'd love to read this one. Okay, this is these comical poems often are fairly narrative. This one is very narrative. It's called He Almost Escapes. The almost appears in very small font and parentheses. He almost escapes with the muse. The plane sputters and coughs, thumps down the runway. It gasps and lurches slightly to the side, shivers in clutter and consternation. A gaggle of people running clumsily as if they were loose luggage in tow or fallen off the cart, and a lot of angry poets in a flap, rags on the tail of a kite. The poet and the muse have commandeered a plane, and they are taxiing for takeoff, runaways on the tarmac. Come back, you son of a bitch. Where the hell do you think you're going? They flail and shout, stumble, shake their fists, a mob closing on Quasimodo. The poet hunches over the throttle, launches himself against their gravity, begs and calls down affliction upon the weight of the world. The muse puts her left hand on his right shoulder, anxious they will never get off the ground. The plane shakes and tremors, sags into a terrible fit of coughing. The ragged pursuit rallies, their spirits lift, they are closing fast. All of them cursing and lurching, swept in their own flighting, the poets worst of all. The plane splutters and begins to slouch into itself, hiccups and dies. You selfish bastard, they holler. What the hell are you doing with the muse? You can't have her all to yourself. She's our muse too, you know.
What do we think? What do we think, fellow panelists? What do we think? Great, Dennis, thank you. Anybody want to say anything to Dennis about his airplane, the Muse?
They're just stricken with awe.
You better say something or I'll start. Anybody?
Well,
So
a variation here in my mind is the kind of collaboration. Here, there's a kind of compact. They're in this together. They've commandeered the plane. You know, the muse tries to reassure the pilot who's not too sure about what's going on. They're both trying to flee a world of opposition and jealousy and contempt.
So you can almost see, Dennis, you're trying on different voices, different tropes, different metaphors. In this case, you know, the poet is escaping down the runway with the muse. But this is a book-long thing. I would say it's a lifelong thing with you, but let's just talk about this book. You're always, in one way or another, your poems are about poetry too. They, regardless of whether they're set on the prairie or set here or there, they're about poetry, writing poetry, and how, as you put it, inspiration comes. In this case, the poet steals an airplane, and he's clumsy and awkward, and a bit of a thief and a bit of a trickster, a bit of a magician. Yeah, there's lots going on in it, and there's an indignation. Dennis, you're indignant a lot of the time. The mock indignation. It's throughout this book, it's in this poem, it's everywhere. And I love that angry, cajoling, wheedling, indignant, irritated voice. It's here. Anybody else? You got to stop Dennis from talking. Somebody.
They're shy. They're normally, these guests are you can't stop them talking, but now they're shy now that they're on
I know.
camera. Okay, I'll try and prime the pump with this one. This is maybe a surprise to somebody who may not have appeared on the schedule you might have seen, but I'm going to read this poem called Dearly Departed. And it seems to me appropriate. Every one of us has a long and powerful relationship with the person after whom this poem is named, or honor which this poem is named after Robert Crouch. Want to talk about muses? This is a poem about Robert Crouch and muses. So, Dearly Departed. It is the same old question. The four women hurtle into particles and in elements disport. 1, she of air. 2, she of water. 3, she of earth. 4, she of fire. 4 who are forever preceding, who draw themselves beyond calling. All your life, they said, is a search for the dead. Always the woman, on the verge of speech, missed, and a gust of departure gone. An impossible search for the lost Daphnes who flee, light-footed, fleet-footed Persephones, O knee, O arm, O face, who drop into darkness among the potatoes and turnips. In every story, the woman vanishes. In his broken letters, crosses the stringy pastures of his vigil. Over brome and fescue, beyond reach or rescue. A dream enfolding memory, the warm hands of the mother who is most there, pressing upon the silence.
So, thank you. I have to say I was so happy to see that you would put that poem in there, because as you say, every single one of us on this panel and many in the audience had a connection with Croce. He, in a sense, presides over us all. You wrote a book recently, a fine book about him. He's a presence among us in so many ways, and you've captured something, I think, of him here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, or anybody else's. The panel, anybody else have anything to say about Dearly Departed? You better say something, otherwise Dennis and I are going to take this away for an hour.
Sure. And then we'll be accused of monopolizing it.
I know. I know. Any comments?
I have one. So as a transplant coming from a different province and moving the press from Toronto to Winnipeg, now it's about 10 years ago now that happened. One of the things that I first discovered when I moved here was, and I guess I should, first mention that I'm a big collector. I collect a lot of things, and books are one of them. And so I entered a bookstore, and I was in the process of shifting some of my collection around, and I was selling a few items and looking to acquire a few items. And one of the books that I ended up picking up in a various capacities, I guess one portion of that would have been a trade, was an autographed copy of Seed Catalog by Robert Croce. This was the hardcover that Turnstone had published, and it was a lovely find, because there were only, I believe, 26 lettered copies that existed, and that was my my first experience with Seed Catalog. I had read Croce before, but I hadn't read that particular book by Croce. So to find it, which I was a big fan of his, to find that book was a real pleasure. And Seed Catalog, you can read it so many times, it never gets old. So there it is. That's my story.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Matt.
no, thanks, Matt. Thanks. I think everybody has a Croce story, 2, 3 Croce stories, 5, 10 Croce stories. Dennis certainly does. I certainly do. Charlene does. Nicole does. Barb does. We all do. And so I love it that you read the poem, Dennis. Thank you.
Neil, before we go on, we've got an inquiry from someone which makes sense. We should act. And someone said, who are the panelists?
Yeah, I saw it.
Everyone will be revealed, but we should let you know right off the top here. Now, you just met Karen Clavelle, okay? And you will hear Nicole Markotić. You're going to hear, who's appeared twice on my screen. We have Barb Schott, Charlene Diehl, and who disappeared?
Karen Clavelle.
Karen Clavelle, yeah, it's gone. So Karen Clavelle, Nicole Markotić, Barb Schott, and Charlene Diehl. So they'll appear sprinkled across the session. They all each have a poem which is dedicated to them, which they bravely and self-sacrificingly have agreed, for the interests of the book, to read. So it will happen.
We're not going to say who asked that question, because we'll get to him later. But I know
we dealt with. Okay, well then there we are. They're sitting in silence, but I see that Charlene Diehl is due up to read. We'll see what she does. Charlene Diehl will be well known to almost virtually everybody in Winnipeg, and probably almost everybody wherever they're listening, because she's a phenomenal presence and is the presiding genius of Thin Air, the monumental book fair we have here every year. But, and she has enormous presence as writer and introducer and champion, and on many fronts. She's also a beautiful writer. You may not be as aware of that, but she writes beautiful poetry. Anyway, here's Charlene, the rambunctious jazz Charlene Diehl. She's on.
Wow, I feel like I need to have a little cry first. I think I have a tiny Dennis Cooley story to tell before I read this. I've known and loved Dennis for many years. And Dennis, when you were coaching me through my master's thesis on Cummings, and you kept saying, okay, I know, and nobody loves poetry like this unless they're writing it themselves. And I genuinely was not. I said, no, I am not writing any poems. And then one day I actually did. And I came in and was like, I've really got a bone to pick with you. You've ruined my life for all time. So I hold you responsible for, so much of the beauty in my life. I do hold you responsible for that. So this poem that I get to read, that is, I think, the first poem ever dedicated to me. So I'm really, kind of peacockish about that. This one's called Erotics. Erotics. A whirring and wailing so loud it tickles her pink. She wants to play it by ear. She has a good ear. To ear is human. In a tight spot somewhere between cochlea and vestibule, living on burrowed time, she says it comes and goes, rumbles like a rock, rhotic, on an ice floe, carries messages when she moves, falls out in clatters, like pebbles it scratches and deposits at her feet, a penguin in seek and blessing. Winter drops rocks brought on glacial sleds, broken loose from the Arctic, erratics in the inner ear, the warm canals and channels. She listens for it. Ticks, ticks, ticks. Quite the earful, something close as waiting, a message from the other side of blood, whispering in italic. Arias she remembers as a fulvous aching in the ear.
Beautiful, Charlene. Well done. So I have to tell a Charlene story.
Oh no.
When I read this poem and realized it was dedicated to Charlene, I remembered a reading, Charlene, of yours, it's got to be 20, 25 years ago, which was all about sounds. There was and you remember. And I thought, how perfect, and you read it perfectly. And this is another one of the virtues of this book. It's about sound. It's about poems speaking. It's about the ear. It's about hearing, and it's about puns. And there are many of them beginning with the title. I don't know. What do you think, Charlene? What do you think?
I think this is one of the things that has been most delightful, and I guess also liberating, for a person who can get a little too serious sometimes, to work with Dennis.
You.
But I'm not laughing. I'm way too serious. I love how words are always falling apart and kind of coalescing again. Sentences, but also, the little intricacies inside words and the way they hum up against one another. I love that. And it is very much right at the edge of music, which is, a thing that Dennis and I share a passion for, where language kind of shifts over into something that is almost nonverbal, but still very, very potent and very emotionally intent and intense. So yeah, no, I love the poem. I was absolutely thrilled about it.
Exactly. It is a lovely poem. And Dennis, this verbal promiscuity, it will not pass. It will not pass.
No.
We will not permit it.
Better
take
not.
that away from all of us. When your discussion made me think of a occasion that I often invoke. I was teaching many years ago with a colleague who was memorizing poems. We're talking memorizing poems, and when she was a little girl, her aunt said, "Why do you do that? Why do you recite those poems?" And she said, "I like the feel of the sound of the words in my mouth." Yeah. The good part of the appeal is actually even more than sound. Your whole body makes sounds, and especially rhythm in particular, your whole body is working on this. So I like that, the bodily sense of the world.
And Dennis, speaking of, all the way through this book, you dedicate poems to various people and you use various vehicles, but I never thought that you would stoop to using a pool table and a pool room and miscues. And what is it with you, man? So it brought me all the way back to Merck's and to all those games of 8-ball. So could you read that poem, Dennis?
Sure. This is dedicated to Paulette Dubé, who is a friend and a poet, a very good poet. I met her at a retreat in Clavelle, in those SAGE events. And a year or two later, she wrote and said, if you're ever around these places, time stop in for beer, I got this pool table, whose the name of which is Our Lady of Perpetual Help Pool Hall. And I thought, wow, she just handed it to me. So here's a poem called Dear Dubé for Paulette Dubé. Though I grow doubtful whether Our Lady of Perpetual Help Pool Hall still saves from miscues or rescues anyone, I want to be there. I want to be without hesitation lifted from inertia, a pool ball white as a leper, interloper in collusion among. The red and rolling hearts want to carome among the blue and brown and green, see the black and pink and yellow ones perpetually rolling and shining. There where they brush against the cushions, nudge other hearts that click happily in collision. I want to be part of the thousand shocks flashes air to, that pool of help and forgiveness. Exactly when their lines true, they clear the table with all the joy and clatter they can muster. They habitué de billard, as once they wrapped the dead Mary Queen of Scots and felt from her billiard table a final game of billet-doux. And you cool pool hall poet, when they chalk one up, you ain't even flustered, are you? Indubitably you, oh doobie, doobie doo.
Dennis, tell us a little bit about the inspiration for that poem. I mean, I know, I understand what you said, but again, it's all about the various ways of thinking about what you can do with various settings. In this case, the pool hall, or an airplane, or a printer, or an ear, and it's throughout the volume, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, here you often have a wonderful vocabulary around a certain site. Occupation or whatever, and here you have these wonderful language of collision and collusion and cues and racking and clearing the table. So it's just kind of right for possibilities, and the name of the pool hall, of course, it was right there. So I worked with it. One of the last things I did with it after many revisions was to add the stuff about Mary Queen of Scots. I don't know, I was reading it for another reason in that whole terrain, and I discovered that when Queen Mary was executed, they wrapped her body in that felt from her billiard table.
Yeah.
So you get kind of strange spillings over and out of into strange relationships.
Exactly.
And of course, you can make all kinds of moves in that about the language of health and disease and so on. But
now, audience, Dennis doesn't know this, but he's just about to introduce an old friend of all of us, Nicole Markotić, who was the editor of the Laurier volume on Dennis. Dennis doesn't know that, but he's about to introduce her. Here he goes.
I am. I have to forewarn those of you who are listening in that Nicole Markotić is feeling a little rebellious and frisky here. She's not sure she wants to be the muse in any way. She's not happy with the poem, is what I'm saying, but she's still willing to read it anyway. Nicole has been, for many years, very active as a writer, as an editor. She's run small presses all over the place, doing chapbooks and very specialized printing. She's a brilliant, outstanding teacher at the University of Windsor. And has been a long and good friend, has as have all of the guests today. I've been so lucky to know them and to have them here today. So Nicole, you're on. You can read that poem however you want.
Come on, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you both. And I hope we do get to Al Rample's question about the connection between muse and amusement, because my favorite story about Dennis is any reading you ever go to, you're in the audience and there's pun after terrible pun after terrible pun after worse pun. And at some point he sort of addresses the audience and says, it's okay to laugh. So I guess you can't do that when we're not live, but I've always found that one of my favorite parts of your reading is when you tell the audience, it's okay, poetry isn't serious, or it isn't always serious.
People need permission to have fun.
Especially these days. All right. The poet loves her machines, loves the way the printer clicks in dismay or in pleasure, moves its arm, seeks permission, stirs at the end, lifts slightly, excitement, excitement. The printer sleeps for hours on the desk, a silent promise, a premise of love. She loves the small spasm of discovery or pleasure when it sighs. Ah, the printer says. She has heard what the computer has thought and hoped against loneliness to say, thrilled to its unruffled talk. She waits for the moments when it quickens and she can hear the husky music of its breathing.
That's a lot better poem than I thought it was. You read it.
So much fun to read someone else's poetry. Thank you for this opportunity, Dennis.
Oh, thank you.
Nicole, tell us about the poem. What do you think?
Well,
Tell us.
as I mentioned to Dennis earlier, I don't know how he got into my office and discovered what a conflicted relationship I have with my printer and how I'm always yelling at it and then stroking it and asking it to forgive me. I think Dennis is telling us that the muse relationship is always tension filled and never easy and smooth.
No, but there's a lot of expectancy.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
Chagrin,
humiliation.
Waiting. There's a lot of waiting and silence, humming and hawing, and things not working like this printer.
but when it works, there's music.
Yes, exactly.
You're here. Do you want to say anything about anything else, Nicole? Because I can appreciate it, that it feels funny kind of appearing bloop out of nowhere, but you're here.
Oh, it was an honor to read one of your pages, and it's so fabulous to be hearing everyone else read these pages.
Well, that's one you had to say about it.
I'll come back later.
Nicole, that's not enough. That's not enough, Nicole. You got to say more, or you got to come back later. Okay. All right. Okay. Dennis, you have Clavelle. I have to tell you, just as an introduction to this poem, I came west for the first time in '72, and Dennis always teases me about being from the East, being a bastard from the East. And I came in '72, the first landscape that I saw. I was in Regina, and I was told by somebody, drive out to Clavelle, go out there and have a look, which is what I did. And it was a beautiful place, and I love this poem. This is Dennis Cooley. Dennis Cooley's going to read Clavelle.
Good. Clavelle. And this is for Kathy Beveridge. Every day and every night, a medley of coyotes and insects sing a cappella. At dawn, when sun ambushes them in the first messy light, she flees among the dry grasses where deer have lain, past the clump of trembling aspen, light, shadow, past the sweetness of mustard and clover, flowers dusty with their modest dress, the speckles of blue and yellow, up to her ankles, splashing to her shins, to knees, hips, chest, neck, she is disappearing into a cleft in the world, where the coyotes last night in sudden thrill had cornered something. It is here she calls, at first softly. Who is it, please? Are you there? Her voice, she thinks, it is him calling. And then a thin, chill cry. Appel. Someone must have spoken from the back of her throat. L, L, L. All she could think to say. Who's there? Who is it? Please, who is there?
Dennis, talk to us about this poem just for a little bit. I'll start you off. The third line in, you're singing a cappella, which is one of your horrible, terrible puns. It's a beautiful pun. So a cappella means a cappella. But of course, what Dennis wants us to think about is cappelle and a cappella. But talk to us about the poem as a prairie poem, so called, or there's so much to say about it.
Well, one of the things is that the person is going on it turns out like a kind of quest. It might have been unintended, but she descends down into the earth, and it's there that she asking for her something, looking for something, finds it, and not at all what she expected. What she finds, the voice she finds is her own. Right, so I'm able to work off broken syllables to produce a L, and then in parentheses L, L. So who is there? It's her. She's finding her own voice there. I guess so you get a kind of quest narrative, and that that landscape, and of course there's that old story of the region that the person goes in search of another and hears a voice, not sure whose voice it is, who says, Clavelle, Clavelle, who's calling? So it kind of rewrites that story in some ways too.
Dennis, could I say something to you about the book bristles with other voices. It's not just that you dedicate poems to this person and that person and the other person, but the whole book is a series of voices calling to each other. And one of the best examples is the next poem that you're going to read, The Prairie Muse Explains Her Role, which you've dedicated to Dick Harrison. Now, this is not an in-joke. Dick Harrison is known to many of us who writes about prairie literature and so on. So talk to us about how you came to write this poem, and then please read it.
Okay, before I just go, I'm glad you talked about the voices talking with each other, because one of the major strategies I have again and again in writing is the second person. Speaker almost never speaks in the absence of others. I mean, of course, they're not there. I mean, you're right, but as a speaker, there's enormously, there's a you out there somewhere in singular or plural. In any case, here's this one. The Prairie Muse explains her role, and as you said, for Dick Harrison. Yes, she says, first you call his name. He likes that. It perks him up. He's been squeaking by the screen door, preening with sun and all the hurtin' songs he can remember. Everyone can see it happening. Her voice comes in a beautiful long loop, an elegant ballet, and he rows ducks. Plop. She watches the little puff of dust. Her voice comes in a beautiful long loop, an elegant ballet, and he rows ducks. Plop. She watches the little puff of dust. She has been a little pokey, but she knows what she is doing. She knows the trajectory of love. She knows the shorts are too slow and he longs for something more. She does too. She knows what he will do. He can hear her coming. He has an ear for those things. She needs to send him a boulet d'oeuf, a quick reply, a loud retort, one that will get him where he lives. She has already squeezed, already let go the second one. She sends it in the hot and crinkly air, music to his ear. She hears it mew as it goes. He has heard her calling. He cannot resist, cannot say no. He is pleased beyond all holes he could ever dig, all the dust and sun he could ever doze in. She has loosened her voice, and he has heard the high zing in his already heart. Up he pops, he can't wait. He wants an earful of love, and plop, She plugs him, drops him on the lip of dirt, bang, loud and ringing in his ear. A spent cartridge at her feet.
You old prairie dog, you.
The metaphor for me came from out of my farm boys shooting gophers with a 22. Even, I mean, probably lots of people would know this. The long bullet, the long and the short. The shorts were cheaper, but they were very slow, and you could see them going through the air. And the long shots were more expensive, but they were faster and reached further.
Dennis, I hate to rush you along, but I see that time is coming. We have another reader to come, and then we have 2 poems, and then we want to have a conversation. So would you be kind enough to introduce the next reader to us? Who's
on now?
Barb Schott.
Barb Schott. Barb Schott is a special person here, and everyone's special, but she's special in a different way. Barb Schott was I don't know what the word is. She was the special editor and formidable editor of this book. She worked with enormous care and skill and ability, and helped enormously in bringing this book to the shape that it's in right now. Been a long connection with her as teacher and writer and editor for many, many years. So here she is with her crazy passion and wonderful savvy. Barbara Schott's going to read a poem called, well, she'll tell you what it is. If she dare. Calling Barb Schott.
Where's Barb?
I'm trying.
Here she comes.
Got your voice. We've got your voice.
Who says ask you to start your video?
There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
I think you're coming now.
There you are. Coming.
There you are.
Okay. Here I am. So, I don't want anyone getting the wrong idea here, thinking that just because you, Dennis, dedicated this poem to me, that I'm some kind of muse. So as I read the poem, I realized that perhaps I am the muse of pain and anguish and suffering reflected in this poem. Speaking of complaints, but you see, I took 5 courses with Professor Cooley, and every single paper I ever handed in was late. If it hadn't been for his kindness, graciousness, and understanding for my, I'll put this in parentheses, creative process, I wouldn't even be here tonight. So I want to reiterate what Nathan Duick said at Dennis's double launch a few weeks ago. And I mean, really, Dennis, who gets to have 3 launches in 1 year? Like that's pretty awesome. So not only has Dennis in his long career raised an entire generation of students, but a generation of poets. And as I said, I for one wouldn't be here if not for Dennis. And that's what we're celebrating here tonight. Dennis, you have found the muse everywhere and anywhere in this beautiful new collection. And Matt, I have to say, it's the most beautiful book. I'm going to reiterate what Neil endorsed here. It's the most beautiful book ever. But Dennis, if anyone is the muse, it'd be you. So I'm going to read the poet's letter of surcease and submission. Pain I can take, also disdain and reprisal. What more can a poet hope? Go ahead and deliver a little grief. Why spare the wrangle and bicker? The odd word of humiliation wouldn't hurt. I can live with that. I can take that. You won't catch me by surprise in a ganglion of hurt. Have learned to prize all you can send and to accept the scoffing. Happy to praise the package of scorn neatly wrapped in twine and barb wire. Wait for it. COD at the door with pliers and a smile in my hand. I love you, Dennis Cooley.
Thank you so much, Barb. And it was very brave of you, good of you to read that silly poem.
I still love you, Dennis Cooley.
Okay, well, you've been wonderful editor, and nothing resembling that editor, I tell you. Charlene Diehl would probably have something to say about this, but I see she's fallen silent.
Dennis, there's lots to say about that poem, surely, and about the way that Barb read it too, which was beautifully. But Dennis, I see that you have 2 poems to round this off, and I'm hoping that we can have a conversation, and that some of the panelists can come in. So, could you read us these last 2 poems?
Well,
all things and apologies.
Yeah. This one is for Diane. In all things, I take you with me, where the 2 men sit tweed suits, and then the table empty, a plate of sunlight, the tablecloth, the glasses, shining with the late afternoon, the empty room, or nearly. Smell of coffee and you there in the room, sweet silence, the sun leans into, warm linen, the cup in my hands. And then this is the second last book in the poem, but this one's for everybody. Apology. It may be true. It may be time. You may be right. I or you or both took everything from the poetry.
Dennis, I can't help but point out to you that you introduced that last poem by saying, this is the last book in the poem.
But it was so short.
Which was perfect, perfect. I would love to hear from the panelists, from the audience, do we have a little bit of time for a conversation? Some of the panelists have lots to say. I know
everybody could reappear.
Yeah, maybe we can get everybody. There we go. There's Charlene. John, maybe you can put everybody on.
Hey, Neil, why don't you read the 2 questions from the Q&A? Because I think Dennis has lots to say about it.
Sure, let's do that. I'll read these 2 questions, and here they are. Well, let me start with one from, in fact, I'll identify the person. It's Al Rempel, and he says, "Hi, Dennis. Just wondering if you could comment on the connection between the muse and amusement. Is writing always fun for you? Must it be? Also, does your muse ever live in your walls?"
Well, yeah, I mean, it is fun all the time for me. I mean, that must be strange because virtually everybody I talk to talk about the agony, had the blank page and where they're going to go and what have they got and they're frozen. I just write all the time, write and revise and research and, just kind of a constant thing. I don't have a schedule, but I'm always at it and I enjoy it enormously. But there are muse in the walls, absolutely. Can't you hear them?
There's a few muses in the walls right behind you, Dennis.
Yeah, there they are.
Dennis.
The electricity's moving through there and calls and rays are going through the walls.
If John's around, he sent me a question from Roger Leveillé, who's been misbehaving in the audience and sending little cheeky comments and so on, but I can't remember. John, what was the question that Roger Leveillé had for Dennis? Do you remember?
Oh, I'm just pulling it up right now. I should have it in just a moment. So there'll be a dramatic pause while I search it.
Yeah, well, I dealt with Leveillé just before this session started.
Oh, here we go. So in the words of Roger, "Dear Coolio, Shakespeare had many muses. Can you name them and specify the color of their favorite leotards? You may also ask Neil Besner, phone the audience, or do a 360.
Well, you can't do this to me. I got my PhD a long time ago and I have to set any more of those exams. You can look it up, you know.
That's right. Exactly. The nerve. It's a question in French, Roger. And stop trying to put my man on the spot. No, let's do it to him.
I'm worried to live. I had my main man Besner here.
I'm stuck in the leotards myself.
So no, I can't name those muses. I suspect.
Any questions for Dennis? I know that people have things that they want to ask Dennis. Anybody at all?
If I may speak, I just want to say the last section of the book was the most gorgeous writing I think I've ever seen. Like in all things, the last section.
Well,
so anyway, it was very moving, and
I agree. I agree that well put. The last section is beautiful. It's eloquent. It's gorgeous. Dennis, there's another question for you here.
Wait, I'd like to point out I'm in the first half of the book, so
I think we all are, Nicole.
I didn't get to be at the end.
Way to go, Biz.
Just saying.
Way to go, Barb.
well, can I just say Diane should get the last word?
Yes, she should.
Okay.
Nicole, what are you trying to say, Nicole? What do you mean? What is
I
it
just thought I'd say it.
Yeah.
Dennis, there's a question for you here. I'll read it. It's from Derek Prowse. Fabulous to finally hear you read, Dennis. Small question. Do you think there is a future or role for the long poem, prairie or otherwise, in this time of social media framed communication? If so, what would that role be? Thank you.
Well, I don't know if the position of the long poem be all that different from a short poem these days. At least certainly in book terrain, if you got 60 short poems or you got 2 long poems in 80 pages, I'm not sure it'd make much difference for readers. But I think the advantages for the writer are great. You can just do so many things with a long poem. It's such a plastic form just permits and invites and allows just any number of moves. It's so accommodating form that I'm not going to give it up until they start refusing my books.
I remember when I was.
But you certainly have periodicals. You have a hard time finding spots for them, right?
I was just going to say when I was first studying and first starting to write very tentatively, I remember one of the things you said then, Dennis, was if you can think in terms of a suite or a grouping, it will get you out of the kind of the log jam of a single poem and trying to cram everything in. I think it's that expansiveness which, plays through all of your writing, makes even a collection of disparate poems in some ways be, one long poem. It's even when you are working with multiple voices. Part of, one echo chamber. And it is that kind of more the capacious thinking that I think really it runs through all of your collections. And I guess I also wanted to say, sort of reflecting on what Barb was saying about the end of the book, one of the things that has always really moved me about your work is that you can be so wildly playful and irreverent, and then you can kind of go into this really beautiful calm space where it is just so full-hearted and so authentic and full of love. It's a really extraordinary, the range is extraordinary, but I think the bravery and the vulnerability of being so openly feeling, it's irresistible as a reader, and it helps us all feel like that poem is ours, that it's channeling through us.
Not thinking it's just manic. Manic.
No, it's like Charlene said, you play around, but then you go home. And when you go home, it's so incredible. It's like nothing Nothing on the planet, Dennis.
It's like this only home, Dennis. Like this only home.
Yeah.
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 Well, I'm hoping the long and the short poem aren't going anywhere. Otherwise, I'll be out of a job. So I'm you know what? Statistically, people want print books. They sell more than ebooks do by a very wide margin. I think John could probably attest to how busy McNally's been since the doors have all shut. It sounds like it's, John, maybe you can chime in. It sounds like it's absolutely madness over in McNally Robinson with packing and shipping and selling.
Well, certainly madness would be a pretty accurate description of it, but you're right. It is, there are certainly calls for certain puzzles, but outside of jigsaw puzzles, we've certainly seen that the demand for print books and just the desire for not just the typical gift books that you would see around this time of the year, but very deep and really interesting catalog choices has just been really incredible to witness. So just the sheer scope and interest of Winnipeg readers and readers from across the country, I don't think print is going anywhere, certainly.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is that I think people want to hold something tangible in their hands, and that's why a book like Dennis's becomes more than just poetry. It becomes, like I said, it becomes magic. So, yeah. Everybody hold up the book.
Matt, you made the most beautiful book
Kind
on
of
the
things Matt will
planet.
do internally too is this is
It is a beautiful
stuff
book.
that you often do, Nicole, right with the possibilities of 8 pages.
It's nice to hold in the hand. The cover is beautiful. The typeface is beautiful. It's a lovely, beautifully produced book.
Well, and the cover artwork is actually by a Winnipeg artist, Corey J. Elston, who may or may not be in the audience tonight, but she painted the cover, and so she just lives over in St. Vital. So,
But it's what you did with it, Matt. And I have a question for Neil. The Portuguese Brazilian word for hummingbird.
It is
Share that
beija-flor.
with us as a last note.
Hummingbird in Portuguese is beija-flor, and beija-flor means kiss flower. Beija-flor.
Yeah.
And in fact, once we're on this, Dennis, let me tell a typical Dennis story. Just Dennis was going to Portugal at one point to a place called Coimbra.
I should tell the story.
You tell it. You tell it. You tell it.
I actually come back from Portugal. There was a place called, spelled Coimbra. You know it, Nicole, right? I think you've been there, no? Nicole?
I have.
I think I've pretty well been to Lisbon.
Okay. Anyway, I'd been there and I came back and Ben says, let's go for a beer. I said, great. So we're hardly got into the first beer and he says, so where were you? And I said, well, I was at Coimbra. He said, what? Coimbra. I'm already unnerved. And he said, well, spell it. He said, no, Cooley, don't you know anything? In Portuguese, it's not Coimbra, it's Coimbra. So I'm corrected. A couple of years later, I go back to Coimbra. And I said, God, it's great to be back in Coimbra. And he said, what? Coimbra, I'm glad to be back in Coimbra. You had no idea what I was saying. So I met Besner again, and you could fill the story from there on in.
Dennis, he yelled at me for half an hour because it's too long a story. Yeah, Dennis, just one more thing. I want to thank the panelists, first of all. It was lovely to see everybody and to hear everybody read Dennis's poems, just to hear Dennis. Matt, thank you for producing a beautiful book. John, thank you for the good offices that McNally Robinson always provides. Thanks to the invisible audience for being there. It's absolutely wonderful to see everybody and to hear everybody's voice, Dennis among them. So thanks everybody, thanks a lot. And over to Dennis. He wants to say some things.
Well, just saying thanks thanks. Great, glad you did it. Pretty glad.
Over to you, John.
Fantastic. Well, if I may, I'll end the note end the evening on a note of naked capitalism and just mention where you can go about purchasing copies of the Muse Sings if you would like it to keen within your own home. It is indeed a beautiful book, and it is available for purchase at McNally Robinson, if you are so inclined. You can call us, you can order it online, or we also deliver nationally, internationally, and can even courier it to you to your home within the city, so you don't even need to leave your house. I can't think of a finer group of people to spend a Thursday, I believe it is a Thursday evening with. So thank you all so very much for taking the time out to join us here tonight. It was really a delight. And just to have a chance to celebrate Dennis once again, that's always a joy. So I'd like to thank all of you for helping to make that happen. And thank all of you out there on Zoom, on YouTube now, or in the future, because this video will remain up. Thank you for joining us and for all your contributions too. It's been lovely.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, John.